I used to live, and the gallery used to be up on Old Orchard Road. And for a while, we were watching this interesting development take place on Rednersville Road. Looked like somebody had a design sense, and somebody was building an interesting compound. And then it turns out that years later, I discover it was Yvonne and Ian building their wonderful home on Rednersville Road. We didn't get to be neighbors because I left.
You left before.
More or less just before you moved in.
Yeah.
But we watched you build your place there, and it took us a while to get to know one another, but we are the richer for it,
yes.
And it's a great thing. And then finally we were able to get things organized enough to have this wonderful exhibition. And it's the first time Yvonne's work has been here in the county being exhibited. This is, I think, an extraordinary opportunity to see work from spanning 50 years. Well, I was trying to be,
That's all right.
50 years.
I'm only 28.
And so, to discover, so many paintings that had been rolled up and not seen, staying in storage, and to finally liberate them again and bring them out into the open so that people could see them has been a wonderful privilege, for sure. It's also been a great thrill for me to be able to learn from you and listen to the many interesting things you've had to say about your work. And so Yvonne's path has taken her from Germany to France to the UK to Dubai and now to the county and many other places, I think, in between. And that incredible peripatetic life has informed, I think, many of the kinds of images that we see finding their way into her work. So Yvonne tells me that we're going to go on a walkabout tonight. So even though we got chairs out and we got you all seated, she's going to take you walking around so you can move and be in front of the paintings as she's talking to them. So I'll just warn you a little bit about that. And so Yvonne, thank you so very much for being with us and trusting us with your work. It's a privilege. Thank you.
I just would like to say that this gallery has been a revelation. I've been in the county for 10 years, but we've traveled a lot. We've come to the gallery once in a blue moon, not regularly, and it was my dear friend, Millie Ristvedt, who happened just arrived. And she's also with the gallery, who convinced me to talk to Carlin and just see how things might go. And I have to say, as galleries go, this is possibly the best experience I've ever had with galleries. And I have traveled the world. The staff is delightful, generous, and fantastic. And Carlin is on top of everything, and give them a hand. And thank you, Millie. Anyways, it's been a wonderful experience, and both on a practical and intellectual basis. So it's been, couldn't ask for much better. So today, I just want to, every talk I've ever given about my work has been with images at universities, galleries, whatever. I've never talked with the work in the presence. So I said, I'm definitely going to do that. I've never, so it's kind of a challenge and interesting experience. So what we're going to do, we're going to go from work to work according to the periods, different periods. And I'm also going to give you a little bit of background, my background, how I even got to be an artist or why. But I do, while I have this in my hand for you ladies, this is a book written by Linda Nochlin 50 years ago. And it talks about the question, why have there been no great women artists? And that goes right into my own history, because when I was a young woman, thinking of going to art school, my father, who was an artist, my great uncle, who was an artist, recognized in Germany, etc. There's art in the family for 3 generations. I'm the 3rd generation. My father said, you know what? You should go into graphics because there are no great women artists. I didn't know about this book at that moment. It hadn't come out yet. So this is a significant book for my own history. And of course, that's all my father had to say. What? That's all he had to say. There are no great women artists. What? Anyways, and that's how the story starts. So I would, if you don't mind, if you do need a chair, bring it with you, but I'm going to start here. My own personal history started when I moved. My parents are, my dad is of French, Dutch, and German heritage. And I grew up in Europe, and my mother is Polish. So from the very beginning, I was multicultural and, trying to understand. And I already knew the tensions in Germany between the East and the West. If you were from East Germany, you weren't as smart as if you were from West Germany. And if you were Polish, you were even less smart. But, all those prejudices played a part in what I decided, the positions I decided to take in my work. And so when I went to art school, there was, the American art scene was the dominant art scene. Whether you went to Europe or you were in Canada or the States, it was the dominant art scene. And the one painter that was really significant for women at that time, there were others, of course, but was Helen Frankenthaler. And Helen Frankenthaler initiated the idea of the stained canvas as opposed to painting with paint, thick paint on a brush. She liquefied the paint and made gestural marks and created abstract paintings in that sort of both gestural and liquid kind of movement. And that influenced my own thinking about art, because I came with a more traditional abstraction. My father was an abstract painter, so I actually grew up with abstraction. And I made up my own stories, because when I looked at his paintings, there were no pictures per se. So I started at a very early age to think about color and shape and form and movement. And also to say that one of the things that in Europe in the 50s was really a dominant conversation was when my father was talking to his friends, they were talking about spirituality and I keep forgetting the other one. Spirituality and, it'll come. Anyways, they had a conversation. They were constantly talking about abstract spaces, gestures, the material the artists were using. So this kind of conversation was part of me even before I went to art school. Now, the thing about going to art school in Toronto was they were still very, very traditional. So when I was starting to make big canvases and stretchers, it wasn't, accepted the way that it was later accepted. But anyways, so I'm still trying to think of that other word.
You're not talking about formalism?
Well, no, formalism came later.
Yeah. But
Yeah, there's another word. Anyways, so this painting is, I made in the 1972, just about the year I finished art school. And it's made with gestural, as you can see, large gestures, colors that are stained into the canvas, and it has all the signs of that sort of American color field painting tradition.
Stained into unprimed.
Unprimed. Thank you. Unprimed. So unprimed means there is no gesso underneath to hold the paint. It soaks into the canvas itself. So good I have some friends here that know what I'm talking about. Okay, so...
So Yvonne, this painting is partially stained, but it's not altogether stained.
That's another story. So then this painting was rolled up and since 1978, 78. And I had not seen this roll since then. So when Carlin asked me for a painting, I said, oh yes, I have a roll of 5 paintings. I know what they are. So I unrolled it, and lo and behold, there are none of the paintings in that roll that I thought, all these years, I thought they were in there, except this one. But on top of that, this one was not yellow here. It was just raw canvas. So somewhere along the line, I decided to paint this orange before I rolled them up. And the others, I know that a couple of them I remember now are in collections and stuff. But so this painting really was a surprise to me as well. That's what happens when you roll up works and you don't look at them for 30, 40 years, right? Like, wow, I did that. Okay, so this is a significant painting in the sense that, you know, I thought, okay, I could make more and more and more of these paintings. But I was feeling a little uneasy about this continuous repetitiveness because the others are also stained and they're very gestural. So then a moment came and I fell in love with an English architect and I moved to London. Well, the world changed 180 degrees. I got a teaching job in the Hull College of Art, and I went to my first class, and I listened to the other professors, and I realized we had never, ever had any kind of discussions even similar to the way they were talking about art. At OCA, we were autodidact in contemporary art. We read magazines, we went to New York, and there were very few. There was a French professor I had to teach color. He talked a little bit of philosophy, but most of the time it wasn't, there was no discussion, there was no discourse on art or contemporary art at the time. So here I am in England, and I'm like really, I realize I have to shut up and read and learn and listen. So I did my best to catch up, and it happened that where the college was also art and language territory. Art and language meant that those artists were getting away from making visual images and using texts instead to talk about ideas and concepts. So I was in England for a number of years, and then eventually I came back. After a few years, I came back to Toronto, and that would be the next work. So we're going to move over. Okay, so then I decided, I came back to Canada, and so now we're talking 1970, 79, and I decided, what is it that I really want to do as an artist? And I decided that I didn't want to be an artist that would be labeled a feminist or this or that or this or that. I didn't want to be categorized or labeled. And I decided that I was going to start from the very beginning with a very simple question and let the question evolve my understanding and thinking about the world we live in. My ambition was to try and articulate to the greatest degree my own understanding of the world that I was living in, as well as the questions or as a witness to the world. So it was kind of a combination about self-discovery through the visual language, and that was important, not through words, but through the visual language, and at the same time let each work propose the next step. So I went back and I came up with one question, a simple question, because you have to remember each artist finds their own voice in one way or another. And for me, it was really about finding my own voice as an artist. So my very first question that I came up with, and I still happen to have this work, was in 1979, I asked the question as simple as, I like simple, as you'll know. What is shape? What's shape? We talk about it all the time. So I made a shape, and I didn't want the shape to resemble a house, a cat, a person, or whatever. I just wanted the shape to have its own identity. And so this shape, black shape, had those qualities. And then when I made the shape, the second question came right away. How do you construct an internal configuration, an interiority to this shape that has integral relationship to its external parameter? So I did something very simple. I ran my fingers along the edge, and where it changed directions, in some cases I call that a significant point. And then I just connected all these significant points. So I did that. As soon as I did that, I went, wow. So now we have a philosophical proposition. And the philosophical proposition is that all of those configurations are equally true to each other. So they're all equally true. It's just the fact that this is connected differently from this and this and that. And that was an eye-opener for me, because I grew up with a philosophy for breakfast. The truth lies here as a singular idea. And I started to feel like I'd never felt comfortable with that. So to me, this was a kind of revelation of the idea of multiple truths. And then it was happening in France with post-structuralism, thank you. French post-structuralism. They were starting to talk about these ideas, but I wasn't there. I didn't know that. But I started with this, and it was, so to me, when I talk about an unfolding from one question to another, okay, so then interconnections. So this is a shape, and I made 17 shapes, and those 17 shapes were divided equally and then I just simply took one piece and moved it to another one, to another possibility. So they're all interconnected, the colors. So, and that was very much already how I felt about being in the world and nature and our human reality, kind of humanist position, is the interconnection between everything. And in this particular work, I was starting to also feel that I didn't want to have a kind of, I wanted some materiality to this, because I was really constructing. When you're constructing something, it has a sort of a material idea. And as artists, we did a lot of gyprocking. We renovated studios over and over again and used a lot of plaster. And plaster was something that also had a nice permanent materiality. And having lived in France, also on and off, and the French have this wonderful pigmentations, different natural pigmentations that they mix with their plaster cement mixtures, and they, put it on the side of buildings. So I decided that, having made a lot of gyprock plastering, as we all had, that I wanted to use the material of plaster, and I used pigments, pigments that you could buy without having, they weren't paint, they were actually pigments in a jar from different paint manufacturers, and I just mixed the color. And so in this case, what's happening inside the painting is also happening outside the painting, and the interior of this is now no longer present. So it becomes part, not just the structure itself, but it becomes part of this whole space around it. So it was a kind of idea of both working with shape, structure, interiority, exteriority, materiality, and integrating it into the space in which it exists. So just rather than just as an object, it now becomes part of that scenario. These works I made in a barn in Auvergne. That's in France. And France is fantastic for pigments and paint. I was living near a city, and they had wonderful art supplies. And so having started with this sort of flatness, I was really seduced by what happens with color when it's flat and material. And so these are really about similarity and opposition and difference and texture, and it was really a play of shapes and forms. Now, I should say that the play of shapes and forms are undercurrent for me feeling, after having been brought up in Europe and having been brought up in a place you wouldn't even want to know that you were brought up there. There's got to be a better way. We have to find a different model for thinking about the world in which we live, because the same bloody thing happens over and over again as we see today, the same patterns. So these sort of underlying currents for me to think about the world and make demonstrations of how you can take the same thing and you can vary it and you can change it, were part of the sort of underlying impulse to make these works. And so when I was living in France, I think somebody gave me a book of French wallpaper. And so I used that French wallpaper as part of this collage. It sort of integrated it into the space I was actually making it in. And it was very, France was a very a wonderful place to be and quite generous. I had a big show in Clermont-Ferrand at the museum there, and it was just, people in this tiny little village were fascinated by us being artists. They wanted to come to our studios and look at art. And it was just like, wow, this is great. And it was just a kind of an encouraging reality that it mattered what you were doing. So that was, coming to Canada, it was harder because people were so busy trying to develop their life, and they didn't have that history of cultural history that they would perpetuating here necessarily. It's getting better, but it's still not quite there. And, anyways, so these works called Day and Night are really a conversation between two sides and possibilities and similarities and differences. So with French wallpaper, which was delightful. It's nice to use. It's like picking up a rock and putting it into your work, because it's always there. This is France will always be present in those. Although I wasn't the greatest fan of French wallpaper in some people's homes, like, oh. But anyway, so these day and night pieces are, there is one here, and the title for this is Olive. And I don't really remember exactly, except that these are olive tones that I use. But that one is Knossos. And I remember going to Crete and the palace in Knossos. And the colors in that reminded me so much of that, that place. So that's why that has that title. Here, these. So in an effort to find a way to demonstrate, because these paintings are really demonstrations. Okay, you say you can't change this model. Well, here's a way of demonstrating that there are possibilities within the construction that I'm demonstrating to you. So here, what I've done is I've taken 1/3 of the painting, and I've divided it into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 parts. And then I've taken those parts and I've thrown them out into the rest of the paintings, the 2/3 that are left over. So here you have the same 8 parts, but reconfigured this way. These same 8 parts reconfigured on both sides. And I think, are those the only ones? Yeah, of these. Okay, so that's just again to demonstrate that we can think about when we're making a work, it's not just the aesthetics, it's also the other philosophical demonstrations that we make in the work that is important. Because sure, you know, I grew up with color. I grew up with color, thinking about color, making color. It's almost like somebody grows up with playing the piano. I don't even think about it. It's just so fluid. I don't think about why am I making this color thing, this difference. Like in this piece, for example, in order to demonstrate the different shapes, what's the best way of doing it is painting them a different color. In this case, these colors were more emotive. So I came up with this kind of color combination, and then I threw them out into the other 2/3. And what was happening also is that by throwing them out into the other part of the painting, there was a flow, a different energy, a different texture. So what I thought then, I came up with a spatula that made sort of gestures on top of the parts, so that there were 2 levels. There was this flowing gesture through the marks, and there was the flow of the shapes as they were bouncing off each other. And the colors are always just sort of intuitive, to bring the thing to life. That's the one thing that you have to do as an artist with color, is you don't want to kill your painting. You want to bring your color to the point where it brings the color that it's next to life. And when you study what color does, and you know, architects don't study color. I think I'm the only one that ever taught color to architects. Because you look at some of the buildings and you go, did these guys even know what color is? Because some of the colors these architects are using, it just doesn't work. So when you learn about color, you learn how can I say it? The energy that different colors project when placed next to other colors. And for example, If I just left all this brown, dark brown, it would kind of be subdued and feel heavy, and it wouldn't fly and move. So then you put another color like this turquoise or blue or green next to it, and suddenly you have energy and you have movement and you have action. And if you're looking at paintings by the old masters, doesn't matter whether it's the old masters or contemporary painting, you can tell when a painting has a good sense of energy because the artist had some understanding of color. It's like music. You put notes together and the notes, they vibrate and they resonate and they make a harmony, etc. Same color does exactly the same thing. So color is a really important part of making a visual statement for me. And I've always loved color, and as you can see, color is not absent, right? It's pretty present in my work. Also, this energy was also, see these triangles on the outside and the triangles going both ways? So it's the energy going in and the energy going out, going in, going out, going in, bouncing off each other and resonating and creating a kind of visual symphony. Moving to Montreal. But before I moved to Montreal, I had, a few years back, I had an amazing experience in London. And in London, at the School of Architecture where I taught color, we had a lecture by Richard Gregory. And Richard Gregory wrote, he was the most well-known, pioneer of visual perception. And he was the pioneer of studying illusions. And he was showing, visual illusions and talked about them. And afterwards, I went up to him and I said, "Oh, I really loved your talk. It was fascinating. Thank you very much." And he said, "Are you an artist?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Why don't you come and work in the lab with us? We would love to have an artist solve some of the visual illusions that we're doing in one way. We would like to have an artist do it in another way." So nobody had to ask me twice. This famous guy is asking me to come and work in a lab with him. Yes. So I went to Bristol and I worked with him on what they call the cafe wall illusion. The reason it's called the cafe wall illusion is because there was a cafe in Bristol, and the cafe had at the bottom all this decoration, and it was black, white, black, white, black, white tiles with mortar in between. And the funny thing is, when you walked by it, it was wedging. So if you look at this painting, you have to come and you have to actually see it. And you will see, if you look at it long enough, for a moment, it wedges.
Wedges.
You see that? And he wanted to know why I thought it wedges. You have to come. Okay, they're all exactly the same height, but it goes this, that, this goes narrow. Anyway, so I worked at this problem with in the lab, and I discovered that I'm just giving you this because it's just a very small part of this painting. If you have light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, and you have no middle tone between them, there's no wedging. If there's no mortar, there is no wedging, because the dark and light have to have an area, very narrow area to vibrate on. And it's the vibration of the light and dark, light and dark, light and dark on that narrow line that gives you the illusion of wedging. So not only was it fascinating to understand how this illusion worked, but it also made me realize that our cognitive abilities are not as secure as we can like to imagine. There are lots of there are a lot of illusionary aspects that we experience in the world that are not as fixed as we imagine reality to be, because our brain and our perceptual mechanism is, is not secured the way we imagine it is. We're in a constant flux in terms of memory, we're in constant flux of memory, we're in constant flux of how we see things, the depth, the color, memory, all of those things are always being negotiated in our through our perceptual mechanisms. Anyway, so that was the experience I had there. So when I moved to Montreal, I thought, I'd like to make some work using that idea of the brick wall. It sort of had this kind of sense of constructing something new. So I started with these paintings by also having another moment of understanding. In the Western world, we have constructed this idea of perspective. Now, perspective has given us this notion that when we walk up to a painting, there is a singular position that we take up to observe the work. But look at this. This is not a person who likes to stand still. So I like moving. And I didn't feel that the contemporary ethos of a work would be to see it only from a singular perspective, living in the contemporary world as I did. So the fact that these the brick wedges, and there is a movement, and particularly as you move in relationship to it, unfortunately now the light. So this idea of being in motion while observing the painting was a very important element for me. And so that's one element, is to make paintings. And then I realized, of course, when I use metallic pigments in these, that the light shines off them. So if you move to a certain position, some of the bricks get darker, you move to another position, the bricks get lighter. And so there's movement and motion in that as well. So that was another aspect of that. Then, here I am in Montreal, and I'm adding. And bricks are buildings. Bricks are constructions. You can see I'm really into constructions. I like constructing. So then, color is also, at that time, there was a lot of sort of talk about memory. And color memory, to me, was something that I became interested in because of this conversation that there was about memory and color memory, etc. So this painting I made according to my memory of a piece of architecture, an ancient piece of architecture that I've always loved, and that is the Gates of Ishtar, the Babylonian Gates of Ishtar. And they have beautiful blue mosaics, etc., etc. Now, it's interesting, I looked at that not a long time ago, and my blue is much lighter. But I wanted it to be about the color memory of that particular event. So this is and the Roman arch, the simple Roman arch worked for me in this painting. Also, then, I had the bricks all together to start with. And when you make an artwork, doesn't all happen in fact, it doesn't happen at the same time. It happens in sequence. You know, you're developing this, then it asks for that, and it needs this, and it's not quite there, and this is, you know, you're constantly having a conversation with the work itself. So when I was making this work, just to give you an idea, I just felt it was too intense to have all the bricks together, and I just wanted to open it up. So, you know, open it up. Use gesture. It's like who I am, you know, just not put it like that. So I thought, okay. And by this time so here I am making metallic pigments so that when you're moving, it shifts color, etc. And I came up with this idea that I wanted the material inside here, I wanted a space to go into. So I made these spaces in between those bricks. But I didn't want to make it flat, because a flat surface would allow you to go through it. I didn't want to go through it. I wanted you to go into it, but then come back, into it, then come back. So I made this into a more material presence, because then you're also aware of the surface. The color itself makes you fly in, but the surface brings you back out. So, and then, you know, the contradiction that we're living in, we always say, we know where we are in the universe. Well, we haven't got a clue. We haven't got a clue. So this was just a gesture. Here we are. We don't know where we are. But it's space, and there we are. And so that's the kind of conversation. This was more about the memory of medieval coloring that I chose. So, and QED, quantum electrodynamic, color, light, but also QED. Yeah, it's a demonstration, right?
What once improved is improvement.
Yes, voila. Okay. So QED is the title has those two meanings. Okay, so then after I did these paintings, time passes, and now I'm very much involved in the idea of being a woman and the body and the materiality. So I made all kinds of works that are, you know, three-dimensional, much more material that aren't here, but the materiality of my body became really omnipresent. And my association with the sort of feminist movement was that I was doing exactly as a woman what I wanted to do. I was exactly unfolding my understanding of the world as I was doing. So I was demonstrating in every way, but I wasn't necessarily saying I'm a feminist just by the fact that I am doing exactly what I want to do. I'm not holding back. I'm not in any sense refrain or whatever. I'm just exactly as much as I can be. It was a demonstration. So my interest, I'm very, very grateful to the feminist movement and to the women that have talked about their body in a more personal way, but that wasn't who I was. So, however, I did come up with these works. How am I doing for time? Oh my God, I'm good. I'm racing. Yeah? So, okay. I made a series of works that were in proportion to my body, because I felt one statement I could make about this world also was not to go bigger than my size, not to imagine to take up more space than I have to. And so I limited many of my paintings to my human scale. And this idea of working on my human scale in relationship to, the social, how can I say, the social exaggerations that we have constructed that have got us into trouble, So like just, take it easy, keep it at a human scale. That was a very important aspect of my thinking. So here I am, painting, canvas, there. So here in these paintings, what I did is I drew several circles, and then I took a brush with thick paint, and I started in the middle. Okay, like very slowly, very slowly, very slowly, very slowly, very slowly, and the vibrations of my physical body become like a record. They're visible on the painting itself. And as I had to move further out, they become less vibratory. But the material is always, always, always the reality that registers my physiology, my vibration, my body. So these paintings, and as you can see, the further out I went with my brush, in a way, the more control I had over the painting. So the closer I am, the more the record. So this is like a record of my body. In a way, it's a record. It's a physical, material record of the vibration of my body, and it's unique to this person. Somebody else can make the same record, but the vibrations will be different. So that it was not much more complicated than that. I just wanted to make these paintings to be a record of the materiality, the organic life. That's my body.
But when you finish the circle, it's very sharp and defined.
Ah, right.
Yes.
You're absolutely right. Why didn't I leave it all crooked? Because I like the circle. So that's the aesthetics coming in as well.
The dictation.
The
of the shape.
dictation, yeah. And the interior, you see, the interior is also very defined. So, yeah.
So Yvonne, did you tape it? How did you get?
Oh, yes, I
You
taped it.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah, taping.
Yeah, okay.
Now, taping is really interesting because you can tape something, and if you don't seal it, it doesn't work. You have to seal it with clear or, varnish.
No, you don't have to. Because of frog tape.
Frog tape, yes, but is that really work?
It works.
No kidding.
Yep.
It depends on the fluidity of your paint too, like if you
Oh,
add
yeah.
water to it, you're asking for trouble.
Yeah, but if it's fairly, dense, frog tape
Oh,
just
yeah.
does it perfectly.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh, well, there you go.
frog tape.
Okay, I like it.
Taping a curve has other problems because the edge of the tape is straight
Yeah,
and it's not so flexible.
yeah.
Right.
The only way I've been able to do that is by putting on lots and lots of tape and then very, very, very carefully cutting out a circle.
If you cut it to be about a 16th of an inch, then it bends.
There is tape that is exactly that, my green tape. I still have it from years ago. I have several rolls left. Yeah,
I've tried.
yeah, I know. I still have like maybe 7 or 8 rolls. Precious. Yeah, and that was just,
It's called flexi tape.
yeah, little green tape.
Yep.
Yeah, I still have it. Okay, so are we talking these 2 paintings? Oh, I forgot about that. That's part of the current, this series. This is part of those small ones where I took the shapes and I threw them out. And but this is a bit of an extension of that work. And I have quite a few of these works, but so as you remember, I took the shapes, 8 shapes, and then I threw them out, and then they reconfigured, and I put texture to it. Well, in this case, it's a similar idea, but the whole project is that when you buy this painting, you can take all the pieces and you can reconfigure them however you want. So it's a whole series that you can reconfigure the painting over and over again in different combinations, upside down, and they make interesting new combinations. So that's current split. Yeah. Now is another wonderful story that relates to those paintings back there. So at some point, like years, you know what? 50 years you go back, it's 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it's hard to remember exactly. But at some point, I did my master's, and to get a better job, I moved to Montreal, and I really needed a good job because I bought a house. I needed to pay the mortgage. So in my sort of sense of ambitions, I decided to do a doctorate. But if I'm going to do a doctorate, I'm going to travel to places in the world I have always wanted to go to. I'm not going to just go next door or do a doctorate. I'm going to travel to different places. So in the beginning, I wasn't really sure. I just wanted to travel to these different places. I wasn't even sure what the doctorate would be about. And so my first trip was to Pompeii. And I got to Pompeii, and I was walking through Pompeii. Has anybody ever been to Pompeii? Yes. So I went, and I was standing at the door of the Ixion room. And you know, they have wonderful murals. And one of the things I noticed is that the murals were fascinating because the figures in the murals were pointing to each other. They weren't just murals that were, independent, but they were all connected through the look or the gaze or the gesture. So that was fascinating. But as I'm standing at this door, I'm looking at something. I went, really? Really? Okay, so you have to picture, okay, I'm sorry. Imagine this is just a white wall, right? And because the actual rooms don't have windows, they have drawn windows. Because you go from room to room, and yes, there are gardens, but the rooms don't have windows the way we understand it. But they did draw a window here, and they did draw a window, just an outline, with vertical and horizontal, vertical and horizontal. Now, from my perspective, looking into the room, what I couldn't believe is that the horse, you know, when you have the two horizontals coming together in the middle, in most perspectives, they would kind of more or less meet, right? Do you get that? Anybody not get that? That's important. But what happened here is this went this way, and this one, instead of meeting, went that way. And I said, there were artists who did that. They must have seen how wrong this looked. How could they not have understood? That looks really, really wrong. So I yet hadn't studied too much about Pompeii. So we went home, and I started to read up on the Roman world. And I learned that every space in the Roman world was occupied by a different god. In the Christian world, we have one God, one vanishing point. In the Roman world, it's a very, very different situation. And I suddenly realized that different cultures move through the world with a different sense of space. Wow, that blew my mind. I've known Japanese paintings. I've known Indian miniatures. And when you look at them, the way that their representations are, they don't have a perspective the way we are used to it. They have their figurations, or their space is very, you know, they've accepted a lot of Western perspective drawing and that kind of pictorial representation. But in the past, they had very, very different senses of space in the world. So I went back, and after I learned this, I said to Ian, oh, we have to go back, which was a real sacrifice. I'd love to go back to Pompeii again. So we went back to Pompeii, and I got permission from, you know, they don't let you go into the rooms necessarily unless you're walking through, to go into the room. Well, in the meantime, I found out that this room was a dining room. And the Romans dined on couches, right? We've seen that in movies. No, they dine on couches. And the couches are a certain height. So I, you know, got all that information. I went back to the room. I was allowed to go into the room. And the moment I went, and I had to be on the other wall, this wall. The moment I went and I went down to where the couch would be, it was perfect. That image was made not for some ideological model, it was made for the person lying in that room, which is so totally different than the way that we've been taught to construct pictorial representations. So, since that time, I have been fascinated by this notion of all different cultures moving through space, through different kinds of spaces. Now, many years later, I'm making some paintings in 2022. And here we go, the last two paintings. One of the things that impressed me the most about coming to Canada was the fact, from Germany, was even in 1960, compared to Germany, it was multicultural. We were living in a country, even then, with people from Ukraine, with people from Poland, with people from France, with people, mostly Europeans at the time, and native people, but it was a multicultural community that, you know, coming from North Germany, let me tell you, it was liberating beyond words. And, you know, now, of course, we're really getting not just multicultural locally, but there's a global, we are starting to move into a more global multicultural society. So I wanted to make some paintings that sort of spoke to that, because I feel that in a contemporary painting for me reflects a contemporary mindset. So for me, these are multicultural images that come from paintings, that each painting has a very distinct spatial relationship. And these are, in this case, each painting has two different spatial relationships from two different origins. For example, the first one, I know we've called it cross-cultural, but the first one is Japan, 13th century, and Vermeer, Netherlands, 1670. So what I've done is I've taken the paintings, the original paintings, and I've made some, I haven't changed the paintings, but I have taken out aspects of that painting that give a sense of spatial relationship. See, this is Japanese. See the space coming out here. This is more sort of a more traditional space coming out this way. But I haven't just left it there. I've also decided that instead of me choosing the colors, I've taken the colors from both of those cultures. So one is the Japanese culture, the other one is the Dutch culture, and these paintings, the main colors in these paintings are the main colors in those paintings. And then in order to also bring it back into the three-dimensional world, I've taken some of these shapes out here, this, out, this, there. So I've taken actually real shapes out of that painting and put it into the three-dimensional world to be part of, to have a conversation between these two spaces. Because it's really, after I was in Pompeii, and I learned about this, the fact that different cultures move through different kinds of spaces, perceptual, conceptual spaces. I really, it has made me aware of what a space we're moving through, with all the simultaneous different cultures that we live in. So, you know, it's a strange mixture. So it's a mixture between her painting and the Italian painting from 1475. So I'm really mixing up different historical periods, and but I'm combining the color that each one of those paintings has as part of its representation. So I didn't invent these colors. These colors come straight out of those paintings. And again, I've taken this shape and this shape and brought them out into the painting. Okay.
So these are your last pieces?
Almost, yeah.
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 And this is what you're kind of working on now?
Yes.
Wow.
So when you're using colors from archaic images, either 14th century or older, do you have any problems reproducing the colors using modern pigments?
Well, I have to make a special note here. Since I haven't had a chance to go to the actual paintings, I have to go to the reproductions. So when I say I use the colors, I have books, wonderful books, but are they exactly like the real paintings? I don't know. So, you know, I'm suspending that, but the best I can. And yeah, you know, after so many years of painting with all sorts of different materials, yeah, I mix. In fact, I had a recent wonderful experience. Because some of these, like that painting, is quite, they're old. And raw canvas doesn't keep that clean. So I had to one day just say, I'm going to mix up the color for raw canvas. So I mixed up this, mixed it up, put it on a piece of paper, let it dry with my dryer, and went up. I couldn't tell the difference between the canvas and that. I said, I have never, and I had to make a lot because it was for this, for that, and these. I went, whoa, okay. It's mixing a color is time consuming, and you work and you oh no, it needs a little more of that. But after 50 years, more or less. You can get close, but then you can be too much, right? And you don't get it right. But it's like any other profession, I guess. You get used to certain things. And the pigments in France were absolutely brilliant, because I got real raw pigments. And, they cost relatively cheap compared to what they cost here. So, yeah. And then, each color production has different companies have different qualities of pigments, etc. So I look at some of the work. I'm amazed how good the color still looks. You always worry, is it going to fade? Is it going to look still any good? Right. So, any other questions?
Your work is, your 3D work is so sculptural. Have you ever worked in sculpture? Have you ever created a sculpture? You are sculpting.
I have worked with glass, and I have made drawings on glass. So panels of drawings and cubes that were drawn, but only partly, so that when you walk past these different panels of glass, these cubes complete themselves, and then as you move, they fall apart and others complete themselves. So in that sense, I've made, I've always loved, I was in a biennale, the first Quebec Biennale, and I've always loved Dürer's drawing of Melancholia, where he sits, the angel, some of you might know, the angel sits there with all of these different measures around him. It's a drawing by Dürer. And I've always loved that drawing, so I decided to make a piece from this drawing. And how I did it is I went and I found the definition of melancholia in a dictionary. So instead of making the letters like three-dimensional letters that you can read, A like this in 3 dimensions, or B, B like this in 3 dimensions. I made all the letters in 3 dimensions, but then I put them on the end. So what you had to do is, and I put them into a box. So what you had to do in order to read the text, you had to look into each end of each 3-dimensional letter, and you had to figure out what that letter is from the inside rather than see it from the outside. So you kind of went, and I lost an exhibition that way because the curator found it too hard, from the museum, found it too hard. Nobody can read this. Well, it wasn't the point. The point was, it was a new way of thinking about words, letters, 3-dimensional. So you had to invent, you had to kind of think about it differently than you would when you see a 3-dimensional letter like that. So, I've done things like that, 3-dimensional. I like inventing. I've always liked having ideas.
I have to say it's a wonderful thing to listen to Millie and Janet and Deborah and Yvonne all debate how you're meant to get paint in a particular way on a canvas. It's a lovely thing. We have such a brain trust and talent trust here in the county and here in this conversation, and so I thank you very much for that. Tonight happens to be the kickoff of the Art Dealers Association of Canada's Canada-wide Art Hop, and it goes for the next 3 days. And so if you look at ADAC's site, you can see all the galleries across Canada that are participating. And so we thought we'd, as members of ADAC, we'd be a part of that tonight too, and have this special event. And actually, every time we have one of these talks, Yvonne, and particularly tonight, I've learned so much. I learned lots of things I didn't know, even though I've been staring at these paintings for the last month. And so I'm looking forward to seeing them with new eyes again tomorrow. It's somebody said about travel that travel rinses your eyes. Apparently this is a Newfoundland expression. And it does, you know, you see things in a different way, but also listening to the artist's perspective. Some artists give talks. We had one artist come for a talk, and when we asked her to talk, she said, "I paint." And she stopped at that point. And it was you know, fine and dandy for her art to speak for itself, but it wasn't nearly as illuminating as you talking about your experience and the things that have informed your work. So thank you very much for that, Yvonne.